Okay, the first item is a cost recovery plan update
Mr. Chairman, I just need to read the little script thing in the beginning here.
on the Zoom. Okay, go ahead.
Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the governor's March 23rd, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Yarmouth Water Resources Advisory Committee meeting is being conducted via remote participation. All votes during this meeting will need to be conducted by roll call vote. No in-person attendance will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access and participate in the proceedings as provided for in the order. Public participation will be permitted by allowing members of the public to join this meeting via Zoom or via the telephone. Mr. Chairman, you may take quorum to enter into meeting.
Okay, again, we had the cost recovery plan update. It was supposed to be the first item on the agenda. Who's handling that?
Just again, Mr. Chairman, you just need to take a quorum to enter into the meeting.
Roll call vote?
Yep.
Okay. I see Tom Durkin here.
Yeah.
John DeLizzo.
Yeah.
Myself. George Perkins.
Here.
Who am I missing? Spiro's here.
Just made it.
Just made it, just in time. I don't have my list. There's Kara. Tom Roach, I don't believe is here.
There he is. He's
Huh?
coming.
Would you say Karen, Kathy?
Tom's coming. Tom Roach.
Oh,
Hey, how
okay.
you doing?
There he is. All right.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Awesome.
Good to see you.
Same here as well. Good to be seen.
Okay, I believe we have a quorum. Well, there goes my screen again. Okay, so are we ready, Kyle?
Yeah, all set.
Okay, so now we're back to the cost recovery plan update, which is being handled by who?
I'll jump in unless anyone else wants to. This is Karen Green. We met as staff to review what Rich had put together previously, I think back in, I think as early as November, and to look at it together with Ed Centio, our finance director, Jeff, Kathy, and I, and Laurie as well, met to review it. Given the current state of affairs, I think a number of the assumptions need to be reevaluated. And those include the assumptions for new growth, the Water Protection Trust information. And I think that there was some new information distributed by Tracy Post recently. And I know I haven't had a chance to review it. It came out on Friday around a recent meeting of the trust itself. And then the other item that we, I think, need to look at the assumptions on are betterments. But basically, Ed's done some good work and is working on queuing up some of the figures, basing it off of the water department data. And we are working to kind of merge the two models, if you will, in terms of presentation. I think it's important that whatever format we use, that it be easily digestible to the public. So I don't know, Kathy or Jeff, do you have anything more to add, Laurie?
Karen, I think that was a good synopsis. You know, what I would add is that, you know, the current model, which is essentially a spreadsheet that lives on SharePoint for the town, is just more conservative than the previous model. But it's really important to note that, you know, kind of bottom line up front, that the funding still, at least as it relates to phase one, does not result in a shortfall in any particular year. So I think that's important to note. But when you match the two different spreadsheets up against each other, you'll clearly see that the version that we're working from now is much more conservative with some of the revenue numbers. And I think that's just a general gist of that. And Karen, I think you did a great job talking about the differences with the different categories.
I think that's all good information to add, Jeff.
So basically, you're saying that in spite of the financial situation we're in, it doesn't hold us up from moving forward for the most part? Would you-
I think I'd let Jeff go, but I think for the most part, no, we absolutely want to look at the new growth figures though, Kurt, to make sure they kind of pass a good reality test.
Yeah, and I'd add that it definitely doesn't hold us up from starting. In fact, I think the sooner we all came to this conclusion that the sooner we start with this pre-funding, the better. And so it really is important to start as soon as possible. For the first few years, just like when Rich ran this spreadsheet, the first few years is so important to pre-fund the plan because there are a few years out, around that 8 to 10 year mark where we do get pretty close to a shortfall, but we're not there. It's still a net positive number, if you will, but it definitely relies on pre-funding as much as possible. So it is important to start as soon as possible.
Okay, yeah, that's been my concern all along, that if, in spite of what this year has been, if we delay implementation of some of these measures, we're going to cause ourselves a lot of problem with inflation and other issues, maybe with DOT, if we're not ready to go at the proper time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that you just brought up, DOT, that I would mention, and I can update the group a little bit later as it relates to some of the coordination and projects we've been talking to DOT about. But it is important to note that we do have the $5 million authorization from Springtown meeting we talked about last time, but we don't have any revenue to put into that authorization. So that's another important concept with regard to getting started on some of these town meeting articles.
Okay. Dan, do we have any update on what we talked about last week regarding Dennis?
Yeah, so there had been some commentary out of Dennis relative to a feasibility study reimbursement article for the Mattakey School site that they had indicated to us some time ago that if the school was a regional school, decided to be that, then they would reimburse the town. So the town had sent some time ago an invoice for the value of what that was. And there was some commentary back and forth by the Dennis Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee. And there were some proposed deductions from that amount to cover particularly legal costs associated with the lawsuit that had been filed by the town of Yarmouth and also, I believe, by 2 citizens. So my understanding in talking to administration over in Dennis is that the article for reimbursement will appear on fall town meeting. The finance committee will likely not recommend paying the full amount, paying some amount less than that due to those deductions. And the Board of Selectmen voted 3-2 split to support paying the full amount as requested. So that's where we're at. So I don't think we would know for sure until it goes for a vote in Dennis at some future. I think the town meeting is first part of October. So
I think it's a Saturday morning. I believe it's the 3rd of October. So I guess if there's a good news part of that, it's before our town meeting. So that if we need to make any changes, we have a little bit of time, I guess, to do that.
yeah, so just playing that out a bit, as you could imagine, if there's deductions made and the town votes to support that, it'll be a bit of a counterproductive environment here in Yarmouth to go forward with some folks at town meeting, I'm sure, doing another agreement with the town of Dennis if that were to happen. So I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but that's where we're at on that topic.
Okay. So are we all set on the cost recovery update with everybody? Okay, I'll move on to the DHY status update. Is that Dave?
You're muted.
The other way around. Good afternoon, everybody.
There you go.
Hey, Dave.
We actually have a scheduled meeting for this Friday. We're still waiting to hear from Harwich folks. Some of their administration's been away. So I sent a another reminder or request, has Harwich approved the final revised wording in the agreement that the subgroup had put forth regarding some language regarding procurement. I think we're very close. I think it's probably going to be approved from what I've been hearing, just waiting for that final T to be crossed 3 times and I to be dotted 10 times. And then we'll repost that. There was a call actually with the 3 town administrators to discuss town meeting articles. Harwich had indicated at the prior subgroup meeting that they were not going to be able to bring a DHY town meeting article this fall. They actually have their town meeting, their annual town meeting, which has been delayed from the spring on September 26th, I believe it is. Yeah, Saturday, September 26th. And they don't normally have another fall town meeting. And they said with so much going on, they just would not be able to do that. So they're planning to bring it next spring. And all 3 towns had agreed that they were going to bring that article at the same time. So there was pretty much general agreement that Dennis and Yarmouth would likely wait until next spring and bring it then. However, Dennis and Yarmouth wanted at least a verbal commitment from the Harwich selectmen that they were supporting it if they were going to wait, so that they didn't get stuck and find out Harwich doesn't even support the DHY next spring, versus they could have gone forward this fall. So that will be a discussion item that's coming this Friday as well, as to where the status of that is. But I think the agreement is very close. I think it's in good shape. And hopefully we'll be able to get that posted up on the website to be the latest for everyone to be reviewing. Dan, did you want to add anything off that town administrators meeting?
No, I think, with some commentary Jeff will add to us later on the call today about the Route 28 project. I think that's a fair assessment. I do know that, there's some language coming off of the Water Protection Trust that Don Howell is particularly pushing for and is of interest. So I think Harwich stays at the table. They just have to sort a few things out. And I think as it relates to the situation with Dennis at town meeting, we have to play that out too. So I think for now, we're probably in a holding pattern on that topic, and we'll see how it evolves over the winter.
Any questions on that?
Is the delay in any way going to adversely affect Yarmouth if Harwich ultimately doesn't participate?
Well, the biggest impact in the delays is Yarmouth costs keep going up due to inflation, 3 to 5% every year. And you've got the biggest cost program, so your inflation costs are higher than Harwich or Dennis at this point. The share of cost, they don't change. It'll be whatever the flow commitment is from each community, and that will set the percentage flow proportions. We've been using what's in the approved comprehensive wastewater management plans. But, as we've discussed, ultimately each town will end up committing to what they feel they can afford in the initial phase of the treatment plant.
If Yarmouth and Dennis were to proceed this fall, does that become a problem?
Well, that was part of the discussions, and I think there's been so much push and commitment for all 3 towns to move forward that I think I don't want to speak for Dan, but I think Liz from Dennis and their selectmen were saying we need to at least give that a shot to see if they can make the 3 towns work. But there's other issues that have come up since that point too. So the percentage in terms of if it were just Yarmouth and Dennis versus Yarmouth, Dennis, and Harwich, because Harwich is the smaller piece, it really doesn't impact the cost to Yarmouth from a split of costs. Very little.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. If Harwich does not participate, does that change the sizing of the plant at all? Or would we still stay with that original size plant that was proposed as a beginning?
Well, again, the initial size that we've used was just the first couple phases. Well, we actually did we did the full build out cost analysis, and then we did half of that. And then we did an example of an expansion in between if it wasn't for the full build out flow, just to give examples of how the cost sharing would come about. If the towns decide they don't want to pay for half their treatment capacity that's in their program and they only want to do 25%, say Yarmouth does 25% and Dennis does 30% and Harwich does 25%, whatever, and then it would all be redone on those percent basis. But Harwich is clearly the smaller of the flow components. Yarmouth being the largest and Dennis sort of in the middle.
Okay.
So until we get the full flow percentages, no one will know what that absolute split is.
Any members or staff have any more questions on this?
Question,
Yeah, go ahead.
does anything preclude Harwich from coming in as a customer rather than a partner?
Dave could probably answer that better than I can, but I don't believe so. I think that's written in the agreement, actually. It would
Yeah, the
probably-
agreement addresses new members coming in the future. It requires a certain process. Yarmouth and Dennis would have to agree to that. And then there's a process to go about splitting cost and what the cost would be and those things. So that's in the agreement. It was really anticipated, I'm not saying this is the case, but if Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth had gone forward and say Brewster wanted to join in the future, that was sort of the scenario, but it doesn't matter if Yarmouth and Dennis went forward and then Harwich and Brewster wanted to join in the future.
Dave, let me add this if I could, Kurt. There's an unresolved difference of opinion between the town's legal counsels on that topic. So Harwich and Dennis use Kopelman and Page, and their counsel has indicated he doesn't believe that it's a problem with Yarmouth and Dennis going forward without Harwich. Our town council didn't necessarily take that same position. However, it's not necessarily clear that we couldn't go forward as 2 towns with a vote with the idea that one of the towns further down the line would take a vote later on. We just have to resolve that over the coming months. Because if it's true, Jay Tallerman's interpretation, to change that would take a trip back to the legislature on an amendment. And we would like to avoid doing that because of the process involved.
But it sounds as if you have to be a member to treat, the way that you guys answered the question. I was just asking if they can just pay a premium to send us their effluent.
Well, it sounds like in the legal exchange going back between the councils, it's problematic to establish the entity without all 3 of us. If you go back to the legislation, that
Because it's
creates
a proof of 3.
That's correct. Yeah.
All right.
And there's also money waiting for engineering if we all 3 pass this proposal, which we don't know how that would jeopardize that money either if we end up with just a YD solution. That would be another question I think would have to be asked.
Yeah, so I think there's several components to the question, and everybody interpreted it a little different, Spiro. So just to summarize, Dan's point is, yes, the special legislation, whether that needs to be revised or not, we have two different legal opinions, whether it could just be moved forward with Dennis and Yarmouth, or if it has to be Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth now. If it did need to be revised, could go back and be refiled with that modification. The agreement allows for a different member to come in, or for a customer to come in. So
I also think the other important part, unless I'm wrong, is that whether it's a DY solution or a DHY solution, especially if we start with the western end of Route 28, it shouldn't hold us up from doing our preliminary work and maybe even some construction as the rest of this gets tied in together. Would you agree with that, Dave?
yes,
Okay.
yep, definitely.
So I had a little question, Dave, or maybe Kurt can answer. Is there any reason why we can not move forward with some of the design, or is it better to hold off?
Well, I think as Jeff Colby discussed at the last meeting, the town meeting passed the article for that, but there's no mechanism to get revenues in to fund that article. So it's really a ghost article at this point until you do the revenue sources to fund the article.
Which should hopefully some of that will take place this fall.
Yeah,
Exactly.
which would be good.
Yeah,
Would it make sense for us to do like aerial photography and do some surveying and things like that if we can get some money and begin the design?
There
Is
might
there
be
any-
some elements that we could do, Lee, but without a funding source to back that authorization up, there's a financial challenge associated with that. We have to come up with the money if we were to commit to that. And right now, there's no money going into the pot, if you will. It will only be coming out. And so there was a financial balancing act that would need to be done to find the money, probably within the town operating budget or some other mechanism. So like Kurt just mentioned, hopefully at town meeting this fall, we can actually back up that authorization we received in the spring with some funding sources.
Okay, how about the money we're getting from the short-term rentals and things like that? Is that been committed to something else at this point, Dan?
No, the idea of pre-committing that that revenue source is not made into a policy or anything by the board, although that is the intention of it. The problem that we have now in this situation with COVID, what do those revenues look like versus what we were proposing them to be? We proposed revenue streams that we all, I think, thought were pretty conservative back in the springtime before all this started. So we'll know more on what to expect on that front, probably by mid to late October when we get the receipt verification from the state on the short-term and long-term rent, or the short-term rentals. We'll have that data then. And then we'll be able to know a couple things, I think, roughly what was the COVID impact look like. And then based on whatever a recovery might be in the future, how long it might take to bring those revenues back up. Now, there is some anecdotal data to indicate that perhaps these rentals are going to extend a little further into the year. I'm hearing more and more stories of folks staying longer out here on the Cape because of the situation. But how that all works into the scenario is very difficult at this stage to assess. And I do know that, the overall performance of local receipts is off from where we would like it to be by a pretty sizable chunk. So there'll become pressure as it relates to any available source funds to be used to keep town operations afloat. So it's very hard to gauge or give you any clarity of an opinion at this point on that topic.
Okay, but Jeff, is there any money left in the allocation for engineering funds that we can use? Or is that pretty much committed to what we've already been doing?
We have some amount of money left within previous town meeting authorizations. It's not a big number. It's enough to cover some outreach, as we've talked about before, some other consulting services potentially. We have a contract signed with CDM Smith that has encumbered a number of, much of the funds that have been previously approved. But we don't have a big pot of money. There's small amounts, but not a large sum, I would say.
And to address the question you asked, Lee, about aerial photography, most of the area that's impacted, we've already had flown from an aerial perspective. It just needs to be developed, and that's where the bigger money is. So I think we're pretty well covered there if we're trying to get it done early. Some of it will have to, because it was done 10 years ago, need a little more field verification, but you need to do the field and utilities work anyway. So
What about engineering necessary to stay up with the DOT on 28 projects? And the
yeah,
Bass
we have
River
a
Bridge.
task in our current contract to help Jeff and to help work on the one that's probably most time sensitive, and that was meant to be North Main Street at Route 28 near the bridge, because they were going to combine that with the Route 28 bridge. I think as Jeff was going to talk about later, we've been trying to get in touch with those folks to get an update on all their project schedules to see where that stands.
Anything else on this? Hey, Dave, you also doing the Bass River Golf Course?
Sure.
Okay.
I think the memo that had been prepared for evaluating effluent recharge at the Bass River Golf Course was distributed out to everyone. Hopefully you at least had a chance to skim it. This laid out 3 different scenarios that had been discussed with working with Yarmouth golf course staff and Jeff and his folks. And the 3 scenarios were to build the leaching chamber fields underneath fairways. We've been working with your town's golf course architect, Tim Garish, on this for looking at different layouts. And the 3 scenarios that were put forth were to just build those leaching fields and restore the course as it currently exists today. So essentially build it and put it back. So that's known as the restore option. Then there was a lot of discussions about what potential use of that area could be. Would it be turned into a 9-hole with a learning center? Would it be turned into a new 18? What were a bunch of options looked at? So there was actually a brand new layout developed, and that was essentially initially endorsed by the golf course or golf enterprise committee. Had some nice features there, had the ability for the town to build a new clubhouse if they so chose. So that was known as the, I want to make sure I use the right term, the rebuild option in the memo. And then a few years ago, Jim Armentrout, prior to Scott Gilmore taking over, had started to look at a master plan option. And that was to make safety improvements and by rerouting some of the holes so that golf balls wouldn't slice into High Bank Road. Cart paths were in a more safe location throughout the course. All three, I should say, actually included a new irrigation system because the existing one's in need of work and some other things. So sort of a middle case is what's known as the master plan option. So we did an estimate of what it took to build the effluent recharge infiltration leach fields to handle 2 million gallons a day of treated effluent that would be pumped over from the DHY treatment plant in Dennis, or would be used by Yarmouth itself at some point in the future if you ever did the in-town solution on your own. That's the thing, is this site gets used by Yarmouth under either scenario, either the in-town solution or the DHY solution. It's just that it would get used in the shorter duration period, meaning the initial years for DHY. Your site over Buck Island Road, where the treatment plant would be, in your in-town solution would be used for effluent recharge there, and then this would be your second site. So we did that, and as presented in the memo, we came up with that base cost, and then working with Tim Garish, we came up with sort of the above ground cost for the other three alternatives. In discussing with the town, I think, is leaning towards the master plan option to move forward. And there's actually, I think, a meeting this Wednesday night with the Golf Course Enterprise Committee to present this to them as well, to get their endorsement prior to both you folks and the Golf Course Committee going back to the selectmen with thoughts and recommendations on how best to move forward with this. If it was done with DHY, you would be paying the Yarmouth share of the cost, you know, again, based on flow proportion. If it's done by Yarmouth only as an in-town solution, you would be paying 100% of the cost. And we sent, I think Kyle forwarded today the figure of what the master plan layout would look like. The red areas on that figure show where the leaching fields would be located, but it also does include some rerouting of the holes based on Tim's revised layout, again, for safety improvements. None of these three alternatives include costs for a new clubhouse, because that would be strictly up to the town of Yarmouth to decide what they wanted to do and to pay for that. But it does have opportunities, clearly, for locating it, you know, either where the cart barn is or over closer to the parking lot, and then extending the parking lot down where the cart barn is, because you could probably put the carts underneath the clubhouse. So the costs went up versus what was carried initially, because that was based on open infiltration basins. Clearly, you know, when you have to put effluent recharge below ground, you have to dig up the ground, then build the facility, and then put the ground back together again. And particularly in a golf course, you know, the cost per unit per square foot is obviously higher. So originally had been carrying 5.5 million, and we had put in there very rough, obviously would be negotiated between DHY and the town of Yarmouth, what the percentage split would be on those costs, but we did show a table in there to give a first pass. And if you did that for the master plan option, you know, it's 14 million to be split by the three towns. So from a percentage, it went up, but it's not, you know, when you're looking at the 300 million program that you're looking at, it's a fairly small number. And the other figure that we had sent out was just to give people a little bit better perspective. We are looking to use the leaching chambers, which probably many of you have seen used around town in some of the parking lots for stormwater recharge or other programs with small package plants. Fairly common use today for larger scale recharge facilities. That I'd be happy to answer any questions on this program.
Question? Regardless of which option we end up going with, wouldn't these two $5 or $10 million Yarmouth portions have to go directly to town meeting with their own warrant articles?
The Yarmouth share would need to go to town meeting, but there's a question, and Jeff and I have had some brief discussions. Obviously needs to be fine tuned, and probably others other than us as to how Yarmouth went about dealing with the golf course aspect. But theoretically, this would be a DHY project if it was to be used for the DHY effluent recharge. But my guess is that Yarmouth would want something, and that's why it's in the DHY agreement now that when they use a site in another community, they have to come up with a basic understanding and written agreement as to what it's to be used for. And, because Yarmouth would obviously want to have some say in how the timing of the construction and how it was built, and, still to be decided upon is revenue, how Yarmouth is reimbursed for the lost revenues during that construction period. All those things would still need to be decided, Spiro.
I guess it's a more complicated answer than I anticipated, but it's really up to the town to decide if we're going with restore, rebuild, or improve.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And then those differentials, they're not going to flow through the DHY system as much as we're just going to decide at town meeting if we're supporting one of these three options. That's a separate expenditure on the town's part.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
So I mean, we technically, as a town, have to decide what we want this golf course to look like at the end of the day. It's separate from what DHY might need it for and pay for.
Correct.
Fair enough.
It would seem to me, in spite of the agreement with DHY, that if we decide we want to buy the Cadillac when we should be doing a Chevy, it's Howard and or Dennis is probably going to make a bit of a stink on the extra cost, I would think. The other side of it is if Yarmouth has to carry those extra costs alone on a course that doesn't really make much, if any, money, where's that going to take it? How far would that, how well would that go with town meeting, I guess, would be the other question you have to think about.
Yeah, no, that's why the last table in the memo gives you the example of what the Yarmouth cost differential would be for the three options. The restore option, that 2 million on the right-hand side, DHY would pay 14 million based on, again, that's an example of cost split shown in table 5 above that. But that would then, that sets the base, that's what they would pay. And then as Yarmouth decided they want the master plan or the rebuild, obviously their costs go up as shown on the right-hand column. That 2 million in the restore is really because they're planning to do a new irrigation system for all 18 holes, all the controls, everything. And the DHY effluent recharge really only impacts 7 holes. So, used up above, they pay for half of it, type of thing. But so that's really the cost difference there versus restore. And then as you get into the other, the rebuild, you're rebuilding essentially all 18 holes.
So I have a couple of questions. What would you anticipate the lifespan of this leaching system to be?
Well, most of these systems, you know, they're going to last a good 30, 50 years. You're putting in very clean effluent water. So you shouldn't be getting solids or anything like that fouling the area. We've found this soil to be a very pervious, sandy material. So as long as, you know, we've put a little more extra cover in there and used H20 loading chambers to be conservative. So hopefully nothing would get crushed. So, you know, you'd probably be replacing the irrigation system well before you'd be replacing anything regarding the effluent recharge.
Is the H20 because of the lawn equipment driving over the system?
No, that was just to be conservative in case of, you know, a dump truck or something goes out there to do some construction. And
Okay.
you don't want it driving over that portion of the field and crushing it.
And I noticed the system has zones. Does that mean you could, is there enough excess capacity to take a zone offline and let it rest and alternate where you actually pump the effluent to?
Yes, there's 12 fields. And they all are alternated as to how they're used. You're not pumping and applying water to all 12 areas at once. It's rotated around throughout the day. But you could skip a zone, particularly if the amount of effluent needing to be recharged in a given day or season, or certainly particularly in the initial years, that could be delayed or taken offline.
And there's been some noise amongst the golf community that I've heard of, and there's probably more questions about changing the grade of the golf course because we're doing the system. My understanding is unless they want to change it for the purpose of rebuilding the golf course, the existing grade was going to pretty much remain as it is. Would that be correct?
Yes. I think what some people may be hearing is that the goal would be to try to keep all the soil on site instead of hauling off a tremendous amount of material. So actually the golf course architect has proposed to do more shaping and mounding, and particularly again over near High Bank Road to keep the golf balls from running out onto the road. You know, he might put some mounds with some grasses and stuff over there. But those are normal safety improvements that he would be planning to make anyway. So you're not having to haul material in. He's just using that to reshape the golf course.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions on the golf course?
I have a question that's related, not necessarily to the golf course. Is there a risk to the water quality in the river in any degree? I assume we wouldn't be here to begin with if there was any significant risk, but I guess I'm asking for a known extrapolation.
Yeah, no, we're down in the very good flushing area for the Bass River. So that's how this site was originally selected back over 10 years ago. And again, we're treating down to at least 3 parts of nitrogen for any of the effluent that goes in here. You may get additional nitrogen removal in there. And the beauty of this is the golf course can, through their well, which is at the sort of the ocean side of Laban's Pond there, which is in the middle of the site. They'll pull up that groundwater, which may have some nitrogen in it, and use that into the irrigation system, which is another benefit to offset the use of commercial fertilizers that they would normally be applying to the golf course. So, and additional homes have been utilized to make sure that we're not adding an increase in nitrogen to that section of Bass River.
So John, Rick Bishop from Friends of Bass River. Just for your information, this year we started a river-long water testing program for things like nitrogen and dissolved oxygen, among other things. So we anticipate having at least a 5-year database of actual testing results for that part of the river. One of our testing sites is on Aunt Julia's Dock, which is right across from the area of the bleaching fields.
Okay. Okay, thanks for the education.
Okay, anything else on this? I noticed we had a potential vote to support. Are we just supporting the concept of going in there, and we're going to deal with which of the 3 plans later? As it sounds like some of that funding source is coming from other places. How are you planning on handling that? Of the staff, I guess, would be the question, because it's on the agenda. Is there anything we need to vote to support here today?
Well, I think, we had an internal discussion today about the importance of pre-funding where possible, and it was expressed that an area that there could be some degree of surety more than others would be associated with the article dealing with the Community Preservation Act in advancing the $100,000 exemption and endorsing that concept such that it can get to town meeting this fall so that you can have the appropriate space available between town meeting and election to get it at spring election. You need 35 days between town meeting and election, and that would get the ball started and be a positive movement forward. As far as addressing some of the other funding activities like creating a wastewater enterprise fund or something like that, or stabilization fund, one of the thoughts was that this is an overly complicated topic, even for those of us that have been at it for a while. And perhaps it would be better to maybe try to do a more minimalistic approach at town meeting where we implement things a little bit at a time. I mean, one thing for sure is that the funding sources that were originally planned aren't as robust as they are now. But that being said, certain elements could be endorsed to move forward. There is also some concern, I think, in the community that wastewater being such a broad-based topic of great importance, perhaps what I'd call an attendance affected COVID-19 town meeting in the fall could be potentially problematic. So from a staff perspective, I think those are the types of hurdles that are in front of this group, the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, but I think there's a general consensus to that, we need to be mindful to keep it as understandable as possible and to keep moving it forward and let some of the other things resolve themselves over the course of time.
Well, okay, but I was speaking specifically to the golf course. I have on the agenda a potential vote to support. I'm not sure exactly what action we were.
I think you need to wait on that a little bit, let the golf community weigh in to some degree on that topic. And the other issue is if something were to change the political dynamic of the 3-town equation and Yarmouth decided to go it alone, we wouldn't even need Bass River. So I think that's just my commentary on the whole thing. I haven't gotten the degree of surety from the golf community as to what it is that they want to move forward with yet.
Okay, I agree. Okay.
And they're seeing this plan, by the way, tomorrow, or Wednesday. So that I did hear that. So the GEC, I met with the chairperson today. She indicated this topic is on the agenda for Wednesday.
Okay. So then we move on to the town meeting articles proposed for the fall, which, okay, Kyle just put up a list there. So basically we're adopting the funds, but we're not necessarily, or are we, by approving these funds, are we approving the money to go into them at the same time?
Well, I got to go back and revisit some of this, but if we were going to do a wastewater infrastructure and investment fund, I believe my understanding was that the legislation had to be passed along with the funding source, but I'll have to double check that for you. That's the Adopt the Water Infrastructure Investment Fund number 7.
All right, so we have a waste, so we have potentially, well, you think DHY we're not going to talk about, correct?
Yeah, I think that, that's on there because the selectmen will take a look at it tomorrow, but based on recent Terry received, today and from the two other administrations, that item number 9 will come off and won't be entertained at this fall's town meeting.
And I know some people don't care for it, maybe you're one of those, but is there a reason we couldn't vote on it ourselves, or is it because we don't have confidence that that agreement's actually 100% yet?
Well, I think the plan is always, to the extent that you can, is to try to time it so all 3 towns go together. And I think because of some of the unsettledness in at least one of the towns, and certainly certain new dynamics here around Dennis and Yarmouth, I think it makes more sense now more than ever to just wait on it till we can, all 3 towns agree that this is the final version to vote on. The last thing in the world we want to do is bring it to town meeting floor with some degree of uncertainty associated with it. I think that just sends the wrong message to the public.
So do we want to deal with 5 through 8 then, as far as making a recommendation to endorse these? Would that be the recommendation that we follow right now? So we have the fund, the resource enterprise fund, the reserve funding, the water infrastructure, the WIF, and the CPA surcharge exemption.
Yeah, I think those are the things that, if you wanted to make sure that you're, going in the right direction for the fall, and that if the powers to be believe that, the COVID impacts weren't too much to overcome, then those are certainly things that we'd like to get done.
Okay.
In your packet is actually the draft of the articles that Rich had done for the original 2020 annual town meeting. And I think that these article numbers are different than on the main plan because
They
this
would
was
be.
from the previous annual town meeting articles. But I think one of the things is that first article there has to do with that adopt a water resource enterprise fund. I think when our department head meeting this morning, Ed Centio was thinking that may not be necessary, that there's other ways through a hosting fee through the septage that we could do the same exact thing without adding another complicated article to the fall town meeting. So I don't know if you had heard that differently, Dan, at the
No, the
department
idea
head.
there would be is that you would manipulate the hosting fee charges such that whatever amount of sums of money were needed to finance, you could move up and down on the hosting fee. I'm not necessarily, Ed was trying to get to the point to make this as simple to understand as possible, at the same time, continue to allow us to move forward. So, I would want to further vet that out before I gave confirmatory opinion on that.
My understanding was with this fund was to identify, for a better word, a parking place for different funds, and it could be funds that we haven't even identified.
Dave, is this a requirement of SRF to have the fund in place? Do you recall?
This is different than the WIP. This is something different.
Yes, this is something different. That's correct.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think this is part of that one.
Because there
Mr.
is-
Chair, I think that parking that you were referring to is more of the wastewater reserve fund. That's an article in which we can transfer some of the host fees that Dan had mentioned, or any of the other free cash that might need to go somewhere, or a place to park some of the short-term rental funds, things like that. So having a wastewater reserve fund, I think, was more of the parking lot than the enterprise fund was.
Okay.
And in here in the article, Rich did give different options for the CPA because I don't think he was exactly sure, but in creation of the WIF, it does involve, right there at the bottom there, of the adding the 0.78% of the taxes assessed annually. And then the next article is removing that from the CPA through the residential exemption.
Right.
So my personal feeling is if we are in favor of these, I would like to recommend them because in spite of things being slowed down, I don't want to do nothing. I think we should take action on whatever we can this fall to show people that we're serious about moving forward with this program, and that with any luck by next year, a lot of the issues we're talking about today won't exist, and our revenue streams will be in a healthier place. Anybody else from the committee have any comments on this?
The only question I had was, I think I heard Dan say that there has to be a revenue source attached to one of these. Is that correct?
Yeah, on the, this one we're looking at right now, the funding source for the municipal water infrastructure investment fund is specific to property tax surcharge, and you have to identify that.
Okay. And just for clarity's sake, the definition of enterprises, any revenues generated within this project stay within the project?
That would be, if we had a water, wastewater enterprise, that would be correct.
Okay. I agree. I mean, if you want to just set the table, recommend these to the next level, we shouldn't have a problem at least setting up the different accounts that the revenues are going to flow through or get parked in whenever that happens in the future.
Okay. So I guess the next question is, would somebody like to make a motion to recommend these as a block or take them individually?
I think for clarity purposes, Kurt, I'd recommend taking a vote on them as individual units.
Okay. So what, you want to put that back up in the numerical order? We can go with that. Okay, so the first one would be,
Well, you know, let's go back to what Kathy had put up, because we're gonna just use that language from that legislation that Rich had put together in the spring.
you
Right,
just,
that article,
you're going to change some dates, obviously.
Yeah. right.
So Article 13,
From the spring warrant.
the spring warrant would be the first one we'll deal with.
That's the enterprise fund?
And then,
Yes.
yes, yep. And then apparently those dates would change from July 1st of 2020 to July 2021. That'd be correct?
Yeah, everything would slip a year.
Yeah, okay.
That's correct.
So what is shown as Article 13 here, would anybody like to make a motion to recommend?
I will.
I will, yeah.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All right. We have to roll call this, correct?
That's correct.
All right, let's see who's here. I vote aye. John DeLiso,
Aye.
Spiro,
Aye.
Tom Roach,
Aye.
Tom Durkin,
Aye.
Lee Rowley.
Aye.
Did I forget anybody? I can't see the whole screen.
Aye, George Perkins.
George Perkins is there. Okay, very good. All right, so that's one article. And then we still want to move the septic retained earnings over? That Article 14?
I'm not sure exactly what that is and how it relates to the wastewater reserve funding. Do you know, Jeff?
Yeah, I was going to say that Article 14 shown on the screen should be the creation of the wastewater reserve article. There was just, rather than creating an article with nothing to put in it, it was anticipated that these funds would be what starts the ball rolling for that article. So you could support the creation of a wastewater reserve funding article with the amounts to be determined later.
Okay. So the 1.125 million won't be there necessarily, or maybe there may be another number that the staff is comfortable with putting in there. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I would say that the best estimate there, we would forecast a new dollar value to be appropriated at a future date into that fund. So, I mean, this would be critical to get some borrowing authorized such that we have identified some source of funding for it.
Okay. All right, so on this one, this numbered Article 14 in the spring warrant, would somebody like to recommend that?
I
So
recommend it.
moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Same thing, I vote aye. Tom Durkin,
Aye.
George Perkins,
Aye.
Lee Rowley,
Aye.
Spiro,
Aye.
Tom Roach.
Aye.
Did I forget somebody again this time?
Aye.
Okay. The next one is, I can't see all this unfortunately. So now the next one is the width.
That's correct.
Okay. And So we deal with that first, and then after that, we deal with the CPA
Yeah,
modification.
They're somewhat combined because the way it's written here for the WIF is you're basically taking the 0.78% and adding that as a surcharge, but that's equivalent to, based on the calculations that Rich had done, that's equivalent to the $100,000 residential exemption from the CPA.
Right.
If you guys wanted to go with 1.5, obviously that number would be different in this article. That's just what
But I
I'm
think
saying.
we already know that at 1.5, there's no support from the CPA committee. They've been very
Agreed.
vocal in their lobbying against that.
Yeah.
But I
This
believe
is a great start.
I believe it was written as two different articles though, correct? Or was it just a choice?
one's the creation of the investment trust fund, and the other one is the
Changing the CPA.
changing of the CPC, right?
That's what I
CPC.
thought. Okay. All right, so we're up to the article that was numbered 15 in the Springtown warrant. Same thing. Would somebody like to recommend?
So moved.
Second?
All right,
Okay,
I'll second it.
very good. I vote aye. I see Tom Roach at the top of my screen.
Aye.
Don Durkin,
Aye.
Spiro,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
I'm forgetting, it's George.
Aye.
Did I cover everybody?
John, aye.
John, I'm sorry. All right, very good. That's also unanimous. So then we'll go to the next one, which is modifying the the Community Preservation Act to help fund that 0.78. Again, shown as Article 16 in the spring warrant. I assume everybody can see this on their screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right. So again, a motion to recommend.
It would, you'd have to change the date again,
Again, you're true. Yeah. So it'd be 2021.
correct?
Kurt, also be clear that you're voting for the residential exemption
That's what we're talking about right now.
on here.
Yeah. I believe that's what the CPA is, right? The residential exemption to create the 0.78% that we wanted.
That's correct. The
That's
$100,000
correct.
valuation deduction does that. Yeah.
Right.
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? I keep forgetting discussion on these. All right, all those in favor? Tom Roach.
Aye.
Okay, Tom Durkin,
Aye.
John DeLiso,
Aye.
Lee Rowley,
Aye.
George Perkins,
Aye.
Vero.
Aye.
Okay. What did I forget that time?
Yourself.
Myself. I'd like to forget. All right, so I think we've got the town meeting articles covered for the fall.
Great.
Would that be correct?
Correct.
Very good. Okay, the next is the Friends of Bass River update. I know they've received some grant money, so hopefully they'll tell us some good news about how we can use that to help our programs here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rick Bishop, I'm the director of Friends of Bass River, and I'm most pleased to share with the Water Advisory Committee the good news of the funding of our Upper Bass River Watershed Restoration Project. The Friends of Bass River, in partnership with the town of Yarmouth, applied for $253,779, and it was, I think, very good news that we were 100% funded by the SNEP program, which is effectively EPA money. Our plan is the first step in a very comprehensive plan to improve a very sick part of Bass River. As some of you may know, the Upper Bass River watershed was determined by the Mass Fisheries as a prohibited area for fishing and shell fishing. So it's quite sick with nitrogen, dissolved oxygen issues, among others. Starting Friday, believe it or not, we've entered into agreement with the Woods Hole Group, the Tie and Bond engineering firm, and Interfluve, and we'll be addressing two of the major points raised by the MEP study that called for improved tidal flushing via culvert improvements and attenuation via wetlands restoration. We're proposing to take 57.2 acres of retired cranberry bogs and returning them to their natural wetland state, which is an incredibly efficient way to solve carbon and nitrogen issues in the watershed. So I think we'll do a great job ultimately cleaning the water in the upper reaches of Bass River, probably well before much happens lower. But again, we're focused very clearly on the area from Fallens Pond North, which is very, very ill at the moment. So again, thanks to the help of Dan and members of the Town of Yarmouth team, we were very pleased to be funded at 100% level.
And related to that, I was starting to read the selectmen's packet for tomorrow, and there's a conservation restriction on some land in that area also, comprised of old bogs, which again will help protect the water in that whole area. And again, I know that ties into that same watershed too.
I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the Coonamessett River project, but that and the is a project in Plymouth that has been very, very successful. That area of Bass River in 1870 had the second largest herring catch in all of Massachusetts, and we have 0 right now. So we're very confident that can be another benefit of this project that will restore that herring habitat that exists to a portion of Mist Actress Pond, but the old cranberry bogs have blocked all their access. So there'll be a lot of benefits in terms of water quality improvement, the herring catch, and as well as there'll be some great recreational opportunities there for members of our town.
Is there anything else? Dan, do you have any comment on that conservation restriction?
No, I think Karen, did you got some information that came out of Kelly Grant's activities?
Well, I know the Conservation Commission voted in favor of it, in support of it. It's a conservation restriction on property right on the corner of Ware Road. It's owned by the Riveros, and I believe they're setting it aside over the course of 3 different years, and it's just the selectmen need to make the approval as well.
Yeah, I know it's an important part because I believe parts of White's Brook flow through that property before they get to all the other ones that Rick was just talking about that the Friends of Bass River have incorporated in their grant. So that's all good. All right. You all set, Rick? Anything else?
I am, Kurt. Thank you.
Thank you. Public outreach, next steps. Anybody handling that?
Well, Kurt, I have part of an update, and that might lead into kind of public outreach and next steps. We don't have a spot on here for staff updates, like we have in some past agenda items, but if you would allow me, I can give you an update on a few things that might set the table for this next item.
Okay.
Had some very encouraging discussions recently with Mass DOT and some of their design consultants associated with Route 28 projects. And as we've talked about before, there was certainly a priority and previous discussion happening with the Four Corners intersection at Route 28 at North Main Street and Old Main Street, and the Bass River Bridge project, and how we might be able to incorporate the wastewater piping as part of those projects. And those are continuing to progress. We actually have a meeting next week to talk in a little more depth with some of the underground utilities with the Mass DOT and the designers on that project. And I do expect both those projects would get combined at some point as well. So those are moving forward. It's tentatively on the 2022 tip at this point, but that's still, somewhat flexible. And because we have that $5 million authorization, we can commit to partnering with DOT. So that's, good steps. And we've talked about that at the last couple of meetings. But a very positive discussion that I had with Mass DOT is we were contacted by the designer GPI for the Route 28 reconstruction from Barnstable Town Line to the Parkers River Bridge. And that's on the schedule for 2023. I do believe that lines up with a lot of our planning for when we'd like to do some collection system construction along that stretch. And they're moving forward, very quickly in order to make that happen. So that's good news. That's just yet another opportunity for us to participate as a non-participating cost. So essentially all we're paying for is the pipe installation and the cost of the pipe itself, saving the town millions of dollars, as we've talked about in the past. So just a very encouraging conversation that portion of Route 28, which is essentially half of our collection system in that first phase, is moving forward as quickly as it is. So that's good news. and just wanted to update the committee in that regard. So we don't want to slow things down too much and miss some of these good windows with regards to Mass DOT and being able to participate in their project and get them to do the road reconstruction and repair afterwards. So that's just wanted to keep that on everyone's mind. Also, another really brief update for the committee is with regards to Parkers River Bridge, a big water quality project that you're all very well aware of, but has taken a summer hiatus because of the restrictions for working on this in the summer in Barnstable County. But we'll be beginning again officially November 1st. We'll actually see the contractor remobilizing to the site at the end of October. And so that's moving along quickly as well. So a couple of big project updates for the committee with regard to those two important projects.
When you're speaking of these projects, are you speaking in fiscal year or calendar years?
It's actually the way that the state does that. They do it by what they call TIP year, or Transportation Improvement Program year. And they typically follow the federal fiscal year. So that would be the federal fiscal year beginning October 1st is typically how they do that. So it's not the calendar year and it's not the town's fiscal year. It's the federal fiscal year beginning October 1st. So 2023 would be October 1st of 2022. That would be the start of that fiscal year for the federal government.
So that gives you some fall starting time potentially to do some work. But, you know, again, it moves up everything that we would do, they would do, as opposed to saying a calendar year.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we just need to keep moving, making good progress. That's a great point.
Okay, so I guess in my thoughts about outreach, at least with town meeting, is maybe, obviously I have to work with Kyle, but maybe we can reuse some of the existing videos we already did and then determine maybe if there are other videos that we could produce to explain some of these things, because I would say in-person meetings are still not going to happen as far as having public forums to get this word out to the public. Okay. Future meeting dates and agenda items. I suppose, well, one thing we have to wait for is the Golf Enterprise Committee. Otherwise, I don't think we're waiting for anybody else for any new information. Would that be correct?
I believe you're correct.
Okay. So I guess we could leave it open and we'll set a date as we need to, but obviously we'd want to meet, I would think at least one more time before annual town meeting, maybe twice, depending on what the needs are. Do we have any past meeting minutes to deal with? Anybody know? No. Carol's in the back there.
Yeah, you do. You have two sets.
Two sets? Okay. Were those in the packet, Kyle?
Yep, March 2nd and July 6th.
Okay, very good. All right, would somebody care to make a motion to approve the minutes of March 2nd?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Nobody wants to second them?
Fell asleep.
I guess so, huh?
Second,
I got a
Right.
problem.
All right,
I don't think I ever got a copy of these. You know, it was on the agenda and I was looking around in previous emails and I don't have a copy of any of these.
They're in the packet. They're in the meeting packet.
they're in the packet. They're sent to us.
Last 2 pages.
Yeah, they're tagged at the end.
I mean, if you don't feel comfortable, we could deal with them the next meeting. It's up to you as the committee members. But they are in the packet.
Okay. Packet. Boy, it's not on mine. I got.
Well, George, you can't vote on them anyways, so we can probably just go right to the vote. I have to abstain because I wasn't there either.
Okay, I'll tell you who was here.
But if you got Tom, John,
John,
Tom, and
myself.
Lee,
Yeah.
Yep.
So, all right, we have a second, correct?
yes.
All right, so roll call vote to approve. I say aye. Tom Roach,
Aye.
John DeLizzo,
All right,
Tom Durkin,
Aye.
Lee Rowley.
Aye.
Okay, then we'll move on to July 6th, I believe it was. Myself, Spiro, Tom Durkin, John, George, and Lee. Do I have a motion?
Motion, we accept them.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I'm in favor. Spiro,
Aye.
Tom Durkin,
Aye.
John DeLizo,
Aye.
George Perkins,
Aye.
Lee Rowley.
Aye.
Okay, we got that taken care of. Anything else I'm forgetting?
Abstain.
Yeah, a few of it, yeah. I only called on those I see listed as having attended.
Okay.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
you see that phone symbol that keeps popping on the screen? There's a number attached to it.
Oh, up the top?
It might be someone from the public. I don't know if you win.
Well, Kyle is the host, so he would know, I believe, if somebody.
I just see the number too. It's a caller at 508-528-7664. Do they wish to speak?
I think it's one of our phone numbers because I've been seeing it through the whole meeting and it says that
Oh, okay.
that person is talking, so I'm only hearing those of us who are participating.
Somebody dial in?
No, I've seen that number here off and on through the meeting. So I know if somebody wants to comment, I believe there's a way to push a button on the phone that they can do so.
This meeting is wide open, so everyone can, anyone can join in and speak if they'd like.
But again, Kyle's the host, so he would see things that we don't see, I believe.
But this is just like, this isn't a webinar, this is a wide open meeting. So if anybody, I haven't muted anybody. So if anybody wanted to submit a public comment, they could.
Apparently there's a few people on the phone. No, I got 19. Yeah, there's a few people I don't see on the screen and they haven't commented. So apparently I'm guessing they're just listening. All right, so we've taken care of all the business that was on the agenda. Does anybody have anything else while we're all here?
Yeah, I do,
Go
Kurt.
ahead, Tom.
I wonder if anybody has heard anything from the Conservation Law Foundation. How is the legal suit in federal court progressing, and has the Conservation Law Foundation made any statements as to the possibility of municipal or future private suits in and on the Cape?
I believe the two high-profile ones of Wacquasit and Witchmere, I think they've settled, or both of those are in the process of doing so. Other than that, I haven't heard of anything. Dave, do you know any?
Dave?
Well, I think what you're referring to, Tom, is the so-called Maui case that went to the Supreme Court, which is what the basis
Clean Water Act, yes.
which is what the Conservation Law Foundation used for when they filed suit against Wacquasit and Witchmere.
True.
The Supreme Court essentially ruled that, yes, it did have standing, and they pushed it back to the lower court to resolve. So what that means is that theoretically EPA could issue national pollution discharge permits to those as a direct discharge. So by sending it back to the lower court, though, they're really telling the parties to get together and resolve it and figure out what that really means. As a sidelight to that, and probably as a result of that ruling, EPA has said that they are going to ramp back up their issuance of the so-called NPDES permits and do it all on their own without input from the Mass Department of Environmental Protection. They used to issue those sort of in conjunction with one another. But now they're saying, hey, we have authority, we're going to do this, and we'll copy you, DEP. So there's a little bit of consternation amongst the agencies now over that and the approach, but I'm actually on a DEP subgroup committee that is looking at putting in or creating nitrogen sensitive areas into the Title V regulations. You may recall back, I think it was 2017 now, Commissioner Marty Suberg of DEP sent a letter in part supporting DHY, but also saying if you need to move forward or we're going to revise Title V and make people in nitrogen sensitive areas, meaning watersheds that have to remove nitrogen, do that on their own on-site system. That's what that subgroup is about, because DEP has started to look at that regulation modification, and they have a whole series of steps they have to go through whenever they make modifications to a major regulation like that. But that is now underway. So those are the two actions that have resulted since the Supreme Court made that ruling on the Maui case. The Maui case, if you aren't familiar with it, you can Google it, comes right up. It was, there was a wastewater district out in Maui, had a state groundwater discharge permit to put water into 2 groundwater wells on their property. However, a few hundred feet away, it went right out into the ocean. And so EPA was suing them that it was a direct discharge, should have an EPA NPDES permit, which they believe could be more stringent. It kept going back and forth as it wound its way up through the court system, changing back and forth. And ultimately, that's the one that went to the Supreme Court.
So really, nothing has changed drastically in the situation in Yarmouth when they talk about nitrogen polluted watersheds. I mean, we have 3, and therefore we are responsible for the cleaning up of those. There is no federal mandate to assist us in that.
Well, there's no mandate to assist as in monetarily, but
Right.
there are actions being taken that could lead to enforcing individual homeowners to do it if the community doesn't move forward implementing their plan.
In other words, we have to take out our septic tanks and put in small treatment plants of our own.
Yes, you would have to do a nitrogen removal system on your own property.
And the cost is what, about $5,000 a backyard?
It's like,
Well,
40
as we've
grand.
shown in brochures that we have produced, it's 3 times more expensive than you doing the municipal system.
And in terms of dollars, Dave, between you and I,
On an annual basis, it's 3 times more costly. So you're in the 3,000 to 5,000 a year range. Yes.
thank you very much, Dave. That was an excellent discussion. I appreciate it.
You know, it reminds me of a question I've been wanting to ask, and maybe this isn't the right sources to get the answer, but does DEP have the ability to, I guess, call it variance? If we approve everything and we're moving forward with a sewer system, can they grant variances, say, to a business who's having a problem with the Title V to create a temporary solution as opposed to a several $100,000 solution that they would probably have to not need in a matter of years? Has anybody ever looked at that potential?
I believe there are some resort facilities in Yarmouth that already have agreements with DEP. Escrow accounts have been set up. They've put the money aside instead of having to make that improvement in anticipation of the town moving forward with their wastewater program. And some of those stem back to when the town was going to move forward back in 2011.
Right. I remember those two well, especially one instance in particular, but I know of restaurants that either have, or even some other properties on 28 have had to replace their systems. And, you know, here we're talking about a system that, a municipal system that may be in operation in 5 or 6 years. It seems a shame that they're spending that kind of money that they probably would be willing to pay the town to take the problem off their property. And I always wondered if there was a stopgap measure, if you will, that would allow them to do something a little different short of a full system replacement.
Well, clearly they need the town to be able to move forward so that they have some standing to make that argument to DEP.
Okay. I just want to know if there's a possibility. Tom, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, well, consider Yarmouth Commons. They put their own system in, and it was the cost of $750,000, but they're readily available relative to hooking up to the main pipe. They ran the lines to the street. And then you have Yarmouth Gardens that's coming up as well, another 40 units. So I'm sure those are figured in.
Well, there's another example there where, you know, money that could be used to create more affordable units is actually going into the ground to treat the wastewater.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody have anything else?
Yeah, Perkins,
Go ahead, George.
can I get a copy of the pro forma that you were using to look at the funding for the whole project? Rich had one, and you said you just changed some of the assumptions. So it helps me to be able to work through that, to understand how it's going, if I have to explain it to anybody. So I don't know, Jeff, you talked about having updated it. Could I get a copy of that new? I thought it was just an Excel file. But if somebody could just email that to me, I'd appreciate it. I have the old one.
We can certainly do that, absolutely.
Yeah, that would probably be helpful if all the committee members had that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think what Karen was saying is we're still working on it a little bit with regard to some of the assumptions and taking a little bit harder look at new growth. And I think there's been some changes with regard to the how we might be getting some funding from the regional area. So I think we needed to look at it a little bit more closely before we send it out.
Do you have the old version, George, in Excel? It is just an Excel spreadsheet.
You know, I'm not quite sure where it is right now. So if it's easy to send me both, I'd prefer that.
All right, we can send you the old one, and then the other is a work in progress, and we will forward that out as soon as we have it.
We'll get that. Or
Yeah.
Okay. Good enough. I'd appreciate having that.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Okay.
What was the date that you agreed on for the last meeting, the next meeting? I had to step away there for a second.
We haven't, I think it depends on what kind of information staff has for us. My thought would be we'd have at least one more before town meeting and maybe two. Again, I'll talk to Kyle about what's available for videos and other outreach materials that we can use from our earlier work. And if we have to create some new things, but I think having an open forum with people in the same room is not going to happen in the COVID environment we're in right now. So I think we need to use the other methods to get the word out. I'm sure the Friends of Bass River with their email list and some of the other groups would love to help us. I know they've been very good at sending out information when it's available. But we'll probably use avenues like that as well. And again, with the town's channels and whatnot, website and everything. Okay, do we have anything else? We have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All right. Those in favor, myself, aye. John?
Aye.
Tom Durkin?
Aye.
George Perkins?
Aye.
Darrow?
Aye.
And Lee Rowley?
Aye.
Okay, I think we got it covered. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it. And I'll let you know as soon as we come up with some more